November 1945. Colorado. The wind scoured the snowy ground, sharp crystals slicing at faces, making every breath sting. Along the barbed wire fence, a row of gray, wooden barracks stretched into the distance, a camp for German prisoners of war. But this camp was different. It didn't hold men. It held women. Women who had survived Berlin, the hospitals, the bombings, the endless nights of fear. Now only silence surrounded them. Nurses, soldiers, radio operators, medics, each carrying invisible scars deeper than any wound. Martha Klein sat on her bunk, knees drawn to her chest. Her enormous coat swamped her small frame. It smelled of smoke and iron, not hers but borrowed, like everything else here. In her pocket, a small folded cloth, once a handkerchief, now just ragged fabric, embroidered with the letter M. She was 26, a former Red Cross nurse, now reduced to a single identity. German. That's what the guards called them. No names, no history, only the label of a defeated nation. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the flimsy window panes. Shadows from kerosene lamps swayed on the walls like people passing by with lanterns. Somewhere, someone coughed. Somewhere else, someone whispered a prayer. Martha pulled out a scrap of paper, torn from an old magazine, and a pencil chewed to the wood. She wrote in German, each word deliberate, as if putting herself back together. When ich free were, ich word tanzen gehen. If I were free, I would dance again. On the bunk next to her, Ingrid, a former radio operator from Dresden, watched silently. You're still writing? She asked quietly. To keep from losing my mind, Martha answered without lifting her eyes. A shout echoed outside, followed by the sharp slam of a door. An American guard entered the barracks, tall, neatly groomed, hair cropped close. He spoke slowly, carefully stretching each word, as if aware the women barely understood. Tomorrow, Thanksgiving. Big dinner. You like it? He smiled faintly, as though it were just an ordinary remark, but the women exchanged cautious glances. Thanks what? Ingrid whispered. No one understood. Only later did Martha remember. Somewhere in a hospital in 1943, an American pilot, dying from burns, had said the same word to her. Thanksgiving. She hadn't known what it meant then. Hearing it again now, something pricked inside her chest, something that hadn't stirred in years. That night, no one slept. Some whispered prayers, some stared at the ceiling. For the first time in months, the air carried not fear, not orders, but something strange, almost human. Outside, snow fell silently, as if trying to cover the ruins and flags, and leave only the people. Morning came on November 22nd strangely quiet. No familiar shouts of Schnell, no commands barking, no buckets clanging. Instead, the only sound was the soft crunch of snow under American boots and the sweet, warm smell of smoke like toasted bread. Martha woke before the others. She lay still for a long time, listening to camp breathe in a way that felt almost peaceful, unfamiliar. Finally, she rose quietly and peered out the window. Against the white backdrop of barbed wire, shadows moved. People carrying crates. One young guard, red-haired and freckled, placed a bucket in the snow and pulled from it a pumpkin, bright orange, like the sun she hadn't seen in months. What are they doing? Ingrid whispered, stepping closer. Cooking, Martha said. For a holiday, I guess. Holiday. The word sounded foreign, almost unreal. In the places they had recently survived, bombed cities, children buried under ash, holidays didn't exist. But here, across the ocean, America celebrated Thanksgiving. And yet, these women had no idea what there was to be thankful for. By noon, the barracks were filled with the smell of food. Overpowering, almost unbearable, butter, spices, meat, scents they hadn't smelled since the war. The aroma of roasted poultry mingled with coffee and fresh bread. It seeped into the skin, stirring memories that made one want to smile and cry at the same time. I remember my mother roasting a goose, one woman murmured. Before Christmas, 1938. And we had bread with honey, Martha added softly. A tiny piece. And yet it felt like a holiday. The barracks door slammed open. Sergeant Johnson appeared, holding a list. His accent was heavy, words slow and careful, as though afraid of being misunderstood. Thanksgiving dinner. You are invited. The women exchanged glances. Invited? Ingrid whispered. He said invited, not ordered. Martha clarified. It's an invitation. Johnson nodded, confirming it. Yes, dinner. You, guests. No work today. Some women laughed nervously, almost hysterically. Guests, Hilda scoffed. Prisoner guests. How funny. Maybe it's propaganda, another said. They want photos of us looking like happy prisoners. Martha listened, but inside her stirred something different. Not anxiety, but a quiet, strange anticipation, as if the world were offering her something she'd forgotten, a touch of kindness. They stepped out of the barracks as a group. American soldiers lined the path on both sides, some smiling, some waving. The women moved cautiously, unsure how to respond. Ahead was the mess hall, decorated with pine branches and paper flags. A sign on the door read, "Give thanks for peace." Martha read it aloud, stopping midway. "For peace," she whispered. "Yes, it's here now, but we don't know how to feel it yet." An officer stood at the entrance, smiling. "Welcome, ladies. Dinner's ready." Inside, the smell was intoxicating. Long wooden tables were covered with clean cloths, bowls of mashed potatoes, pitchers of water, and at the center, a massive roasted turkey, golden, shiny, almost dreamlike. The women hesitated at the threshold. No one dared to sit. "May we?" Martha asked. "Please," the officer said, stepping aside to let them in. She sat down. Only then did she notice her hands were trembling. Before her lay a real plate, porcelain, not tin, and utensils. A fork shining in the warm light, not a dented spoon. Music played softly. Someone had put on a record. "I'll be seeing you." The women listened in silence. Some lips trembled. Some tears ran down cheeks. Ingrid whispered, "They are just feeding us, without conditions." "Seems so," Martha replied. "Just because it's a holiday." Martha didn't fully understand it yet. But for the first time in years, as she breathed in the smell of real food, something inside her cracked. That wall that had held the war inside her. The aroma was almost unbearable. Warm, homey, the kind that made your heart beat faster because it reminded you what a home once felt like. American soldiers moved along the tables, serving plates, laughing, talking among themselves, as if forgetting that at this table sat former enemies. Martha stared at the turkey, golden, juicy, just like in the old magazine pictures she had once flipped through before Christmas. But now it wasn't a picture, not a dream. It was real food, real peace. She held the fork, but couldn't bring herself to start. Too much symbolism. The peace of sitting at the same table with people she had recently tended to after bombings. Next to her, Ingrid lowered her head, avoiding eye contact with a young American soldier across from them. He noticed and softly said, in broken German, "Kein Krieg mehr. Nur Essen. No more war. Just food." Ingrid flinched, then gave a tentative smile. "Danke," she whispered. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the music played. On the old gramophone, Bing Crosby's voice filled the room. "I'll be home for Christmas." The song felt both mocking and comforting at once. Finally, Martha took a bite of turkey. Warm meat, spiced, buttery, salty, simple. Yet from the first taste, something inside her gave way. She hadn't eaten anything like this since 1943. Back then, in a Hamburg hospital, a piece of bread with margarine was a luxury. She closed her eyes and suddenly saw it. Her mother cutting bread, her father laughing, her younger sister running through the yard. That house had long since been erased from the world. But this taste brought it back, if only for a second. Tears ran down her face. Not sobs, just quiet, silent pain finally finding an exit. She looked up and saw she wasn't alone. Ingrid was crying too. Hilda clutched her spoon like a cross. Even the young freckled soldier stood by the tray, unsure what to do. Then Sergeant Johnson spoke loudly, addressing them all. Today we give thanks for peace. He paused and added softly, and for forgiveness. The women didn't reply, but some folded their hands, as if in prayer. Martha simply nodded, feeling that no other language was needed at that moment. Later, as dinner drew to a close, the Americans offered dessert, pieces of pumpkin pie. Martha stared in surprise. "What is this?" she asked. "Pumpkin pie," the soldier smiled. "Traditional, like Christmas in November." She tasted it. Sweetness struck her heart, as if childhood had returned for a moment. Tears flowed again. But these were different, not bitter, just human. When the women left the mess hall, evening had already thickened around the camp. Snow swirled in the lamp's glow, and everything felt, for the first time, less like a prison and more like a temporary refuge from a world. Martha stopped and looked at the sky. She whispered in German, "Vielleicht beginnt Frieden hier." Maybe peace begins right here. The night was quiet, as if the world itself was afraid to move. Inside the barracks, dim light from kerosene lamps reflected off the windows, mixing with a faint smell of smoke from the stove. The women returned from dinner almost silently. No one spoke about what had happened. Each held it inside, as if it were too fragile to put into words. Martha sat on her bunk, still tasting the pumpkin pie on her lips. Sweet, spicy, warm, and behind it all memory, not just of food, but of what it meant to be alive. "You can't sleep either?" Ingrid asked, lying next to her. "No," Martha replied. "I keep thinking, how did they do it?" "Do what?" "Forgive. Let us sit at their table. After everything we did." Ingrid sighed. Maybe it's easier for them. They didn't watch cities crumble. Martha said nothing. Images came unbidden. Charred walls of Hamburg, cries of the wounded, soldiers' eyes she had bandaged, knowing many wouldn't survive the night. And then tonight's table. Warm light, smell of meat, smiles. Two realities that shouldn't coexist. Yet today, they met in one room. Outside, someone whistled, an American on guard duty. Then a faint sound of a harmonica, almost indecipherable, like a song played by someone who couldn't play, but needed sound. The women listened. Some cried openly. Some even tapped along, clinking spoons against tin cups. Amid the strange music, Martha realized the war had really ended, not in newspapers, not in speeches, but here inside her. The next morning, the camp returned to routine, roll call, cleaning, patrols. But something had shifted. The Americans no longer looked at the women as prisoners. Some even waved. Some said, "Good morning." Johnson passed by, dropping a short line over his shoulder. "Dinner was good." "Huh?" Martha nodded. "Yes, very good." He smirked. "My wife cooks like that. Back home in Ohio." "Ohio," she repeated, tasting the word. "Far away." "Far enough to miss it," he replied, and walked on. During the day, Martha found a small bundle at the door of her barracks. Inside was a piece of bread and a scrap of paper written in shaky English. "For my wife." She said, "Every woman should eat something sweet after tears." Martha held the note for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Then she carefully tucked it between the pages of her notebook, right next to the phrase she had written long ago. "If I were free, I would dance again." That evening, the women gathered around the stove. Hilda suddenly said, "You know, maybe not everything is lost." "What do you mean?" Ingrid asked. "Well, if our enemies can feed us, maybe we can still be human too." Martha looked up and smiled. Maybe peace really does start here. Outside the barracks, snow fell slowly, softly. White, clean, as if someone above were erasing the past and giving him a chance to start over. The next morning, the camp followed the usual routine again, but now the air felt different. Quiet without fear. Even the dogs didn't bark as fiercely as before. The Americans, normally strict and cold, now exchanged glances with the prisoners, as if seeing them as people for the first time. Martha noticed Johnson, the sergeant who had brought the Thanksgiving news, walking along the barracks with envelopes in his hands. He stopped in front of her. "Miss Martha, right?" Yes, she nodded. He pulled a small photograph from the envelope. A woman with a child on her lap, a house with a white fence and garden behind them. My wife and son, he said. She saw your picture in the newspaper. Asked me to show you this. Martha was surprised. My picture? Johnson nodded. Reporters came yesterday. They took pictures you and the other ladies at dinner. My wife saw it in the local paper. She said, they look tired. I hope someone give them kindness. He paused, then added, she wanted you to know, not everyone hates you. Martha stared at the photograph. The woman's smile was gentle, the same soft warmth she remembered from her own mother, long gone under the rubble. The child held a wooden toy plane. He looks like my brother, she said softly. Brother? Yes, my little brother. He was 8 when she trailed off. Johnson didn't press. He simply nodded. My son's name is Peter. He's 7. Maybe when he grows up, there will be no more uniforms, no more camps, just people. The words hung in the air like a prayer. Meanwhile, life in the camp continued its fragile normality. The women worked in the laundry, patched clothes, shoveled snow. But even their laughter after that dinner sounded different, slower, gentler, real. That evening, Ingrid brought a tin can filled with dried apples. One of the soldiers gave them, she said. He said, for Christmas spirit. The women laughed. Real laughter, not nervous, not bitter. Martha sat by the stove, watching the flames, and thought how strange it all was. A year ago, she had bandaged the wounded under fire, smelled blood, heard screams. And now, apples, snow, photographs of someone else's children. All of it made surviving worth it. At night, she opened her notebook again and added a new line to the old phrase. If I were free, I would dance, and maybe invite someone I yesterday called an enemy. Outside, lanterns shone, and snow fell so quietly it felt as if God himself wanted that night to leave no trace of the war. The snow had been falling for 3 days straight. The world outside turned into a silent white expanse. No roads, no horizon. The camp seemed frozen, waiting for something new that no one could name. Inside the barracks, the women went about their routines, laundry, letters that might never be sent. But in their movements, something soft had returned, not resignation, but calm acceptance. That day, Martha saw Johnson again. He carried a crate of firewood, his face red from the cold. Need help? She asked in English, slightly awkwardly. He looked surprised, then smiled. You? Help me? No, you'll freeze. I'm not made of glass, she said, stepping forward to grab a log. He laughed. Glass, good word. For the first time in a long while, Martha laughed too, quiet, real. As they carried firewood into the barracks, Johnson looked around. Low ceilings, worn bunks, the old stove. Not home, huh? He said. No, Martha replied, but warmer than the basement in Hamburg. He nodded, and there was no pity in his eyes, only understanding. My town, Cleveland. After the war started, we made planes. Yes, I know, Martha said. They flew over us. He fell silent. A long pause. I'm sorry, he finally said. She shook her head. Don't. War isn't you or me. It's a sickness that makes everyone the same. He looked at her for a long moment, then quietly said, You talk like my wife. When he left, Martha stood by the door for a while. She felt as if something larger than words had passed between them in that simple exchange. Perhaps forgiveness wasn't a single act, but a process, beginning with a human glance. That evening, the Americans turned on the radio again. The announcer spoke of holidays, soldiers returning home, the new peace in Europe. Music filled the camp, silent night. The women listened and cried, not from pain, but because finally they allowed themselves to feel. Ingrid brought an old box of buttons from the laundry. I want to make a tree, she said. A tree? Martha asked, surprised. We don't have branches. We will, Ingrid replied. We'll make one from thread and buttons. Thus appeared in the barracks a symbol of Christmas. Funny, crooked, but real. A tiny miracle in the middle of the camp. At night, Martha opened her notebook again. On the page about freedom, she added, "Today I don't feel like a prisoner. If I ever go home, I'll tell them that even enemies can give light." She set down her pencil and looked out the window. Snow fell, covering everything in a blanket of white calm. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. The next day, the camp seemed almost normal. The women performed routine tasks: sweeping snow, mending clothes, checking bunks. But in the air, there was something different, a sense that something new had seeped into the walls. Martha and Ingrid walked toward the laundry. "Did you notice?" Ingrid asked. "They don't look at us like prisoners anymore." "Yes," Martha nodded, "but I still don't know how to respond to them." When they entered, the Americans were busy with their own chores. One young lieutenant noticed them and approached. "Hello, ladies," he said with casual smile, though there was sincerity in his eyes. "How was dinner yesterday?" The women exchanged glances. "Good," Martha said softly. "Really?" Ingrid asked. "Just good? No conditions, no photos?" The lieutenant nodded. "Just because it's Thanksgiving. Because we're human." The word struck a wall inside Martha. She remembered all her fears, all the days in the hospitals, the smell of blood and smoke. And suddenly she understood they were human too, even those who had been her enemies. Later, in the barracks, the women sat by the stove. "You know," Hilda said, "if someone told me a year ago that I'd be drinking tea with Americans and feel like they were friends, I wouldn't have believed it. And now," Martha asked, "now, I believe," Hilda replied, "because I can feel it." At that moment, Johnson approached the barracks with a letter. He handed it to Martha. "From my mother," she says, "sometimes kindness is the only weapon left." Martha took the letter and felt a strange mix of emotions: gratitude, confusion, and an odd relief. That evening, music played again, this time a live harmonica. A soldier played an old tune, and the women sat nearby. Conversations began, the first in months. "Do you miss home?" Ingrid asked Martha. "Yes, sometimes," Martha sighed. "But now I think maybe home is where someone understands you." "I agree," Ingrid nodded, "even if it's not your land." The words were simple, yet inside them, a discovery. They could speak. They could trust. They could live again. When the women went to sleep, for the first time in a long while, they felt that peace was possible, not just on paper, but here, in this barracks, among people who had been enemies yesterday. Outside, snow fell soft and white, covering the past as if giving them a fresh start. The next day, the camp awakened in a new rhythm. The women no longer trudged silently through the snow. Their steps were lighter, careful but confident, and their gazes carried a quiet assurance. Each of them felt a strange sensation. They were still prisoners, yet something inside them no longer held them captive. The walls of fear and tension that had wrapped around them for months, even years, were beginning to loosen. Martha sat at a table in the barracks, sifting through old buttons, lost in thought. The small things suddenly carried weight. The texture of the buttons, the warmth of the sunlight spilling through the window, the faint smell of burning wood from the stove. Life felt layered with meaning again. A knock came at the door. Martha opened it to find a soldier, holding an envelope and a small box. "For you," he said. "From my wife." Martha took the box and opened it carefully. Inside lay a small ceramic angel, its wings delicately painted, and a note. She said, "Even in dark times, small light matters. Keep this, and remember, kindness is stronger than fear." Martha pressed the angel to her chest. Tears streamed down her face, but these were no longer tears of pain. They were tears of understanding, recognition, and release. That evening, the women gathered around the stove. "This is strange," Ingrid said, examining the angel. "The war was the worst thing, and yet they give us light." "Not just light," Martha replied softly. "Hope." They sat in silence for a while, letting the meaning of it settle in. Then Hilda whispered, "I never thought I could accept something from those I considered enemies. And now, I want to believe it's real." Martha exhaled slowly and opened her notebook. She wrote, Yesterday we ate together. Today we hold the light in our hands. Maybe this is how peace begins. Outside, the snow continued to fall. It blanketed the ground like a promise, and each flake seemed to symbolize that peace could exist even where war had reigned. The women slept soundly that night. Some whispered prayers. Some laughed softly in their sleep. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but a small sense of freedom had taken root in their hearts. Night fell over the camp like a heavy quilt. In the barracks, the lamps were dimmed, but on her bunk, Martha kept a faint kerosene light to write by. She opened her notebook and wrote. Today was strange. We sat at one table with those we called enemies yesterday, and they smiled, not because of orders, not for photographs, but simply because they could. I cannot forget this. Ingrid sat beside her, holding a mug of warm milk. I still can't believe it was real, she said. Not a trick, not a test, just humanity. Hilda stayed silent, leaning against the wall. Sometimes she wept quietly. Sometimes she stared at the floor. Martha knew. Each of them had endured so much pain that these simple moments of warmth now felt like miracles. Outside, the camp appeared frozen and empty. The white snow covered everything, as if trying to hide the scars of war. The wind rustled through the trees, reminding them that peace had not vanished entirely, even if memory of it had been buried. Martha stood and looked out the window. She saw an American soldier clearing snow near the mess hall. He noticed her gaze and nodded, a quiet smile on his face. And it mattered, not the words, but the look that said, "You are safe. You are human." She returned to her thoughts. In her notebook appeared a new line. The war took so much, but today I realized we can reclaim a part of our humanity. And we don't need victories, guns, or orders for that. Just one dinner and a few smiles. In that moment, the women spoke quietly among themselves. Do you remember the smell of bread at home? Ingrid asked. Yes, Martha replied. And the smell of pie, it's almost like home. They laughed and cried simultaneously. Their tears were no longer bitter. They were warm, as if their bodies were finally releasing the tension of years. Hilda looked at the small ceramic angel, the gift from Johnson's wife. A little light, she murmured. It really can warm you. Martha smiled. Even when there's cold and snow, it reminds us that we can be human. The night stretched on. Snow fell, brushing the branches, rustling beneath the windows. Martha closed her notebook and lay on her bunk. Her heart beat calmly. For the first time in a long while, she thought about what tomorrow might bring, but already knew one thing. Even in captivity, even after all the pain, it was possible to feel peace again. And while the camp slept, the soft glow of candles and lamps filtered through the windows like a quiet promise. Peace is possible where it is accepted and nurtured, even in the smallest details. Morning came quietly. The camp was bathed in the white light of falling snow, gently covering the past with a layer of purity. The women awoke with a sense that the previous night's dinner and quiet had changed them. It was a feeling of small freedom, the first in a long time. Martha sat by the window, holding her notebook. She reread the entries from the last days about freedom, light, and human kindness. A strange thought came to her. One could move forward without carrying the full weight of the past. Ingrid entered with a mug of hot milk. I think, she said softly, that we finally understand one thing. Today, an enemy is not human, if around them there is a choice to be kind. Martha nodded, smiling. Today we saw it ourselves. We sat at one table, ate turkey, laughed and cried. And that matters. Small signs of life began appearing in the camp. Johnson carried a basket of apples and candy for women. A soldier shared news about letters from relatives. For the first time in a long while, the women allowed themselves to smile without fear or tension. Martha took an old phrase from her notebook. If I were free, I would dance again. And added, today I realize that dancing doesn't have to be only physical. You can dance in your soul. You can sing, laugh, and feel the people around you as friends, not enemies. That evening, the women gathered by the stove. The small ceramic angel, a gift from Johnson's wife, stood on the table. The tiny light from the lamp reflected in its eyes, and the women felt that even in the darkest places, one could keep the light. Maybe when we return home, Hilda said, we'll remember this day as the beginning of something new. The beginning of peace, added Ingrid. Martha smiled. She thought of home, of family, of what remained in the past, and realized that the past could not erase the human warmth they had received here. The next day, the Americans prepared a small outdoor celebration. The women helped decorate the camp with branches, snow garlands, and simple ornaments. Music played softly. Laughter sounded natural. No one felt imprisoned by the moment. Everyone was just human. Martha approached Johnson quietly and said, "Thank you for everything." He nodded, smiled, and replied, "No need, just humanity." And it was the strongest lesson of all. Humanity is stronger than anything, even after war. When Martha returned to her bunk and looked out the window, snow fell so gently it seemed the world was ready to begin again. She closed her eyes and silently thanked the sky that even in captivity, even after all the pain, one could taste life, light, and peace again. And so, in the barracks on foreign soil, among people who've been enemies yesterday, a new day began, a day of hope and peace that would never be forgotten. The snow continued to fall outside, soft and steady, blanketing the camp in quiet. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint sandalwood smoke. Inside, the women moved through their routines with a lightness that had been impossible before. Martha looked out the window, watching the snow swirl and settle. She felt the weight of the past still there, but lighter somehow. The world was still scarred, but inside her, a fragile peace had begun to grow. She opened her notebook one last time and wrote, "The war took so much, but today I learned that we can reclaim part of our humanity. We don't need victories or guns for this. A single dinner, a few smiles, a moment of kindness, that is enough to bring the world back." Ingrid came over with a cup of tea. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly. Martha nodded. "Yes, peace is possible, even here, even now." The small ceramic angel glimmered in the light of the kerosene lamp on the table. Its presence reminded them that even tiny gestures could hold immense power. Outside, the camp was silent except for the soft crunch of snow under a soldier's boots. Inside, laughter and quiet conversation filled the barracks. For the first time in years, the women felt the warmth of normal life, not as prisoners, not as soldiers, not as victims, but simply as people. Martha thought of the life she had left behind, of her family, of everything lost. Yet in that moment, she realized that what mattered most was not what had been destroyed, but what could still be rebuilt. She closed her notebook, placing it carefully on the bunk beside her. Her heart was calm, her mind clear. The snow continued to fall, gentle and white, as if the world itself was giving them a chance to start anew. And in that quiet, fragile peace, Martha understood. Even after all the pain, even after all the loss, life could begin again. The camp slept under the snow, the world outside frozen and silent. Yet inside, hope lived. And for these women, yesterday's enemies had become the bearers of a new beginning. The day had come, the day of quiet, enduring humanity, a day that would be remembered forever.
One story has ended, but there are many more to come. Subscribe to stay up to date with the next story.